Welcome back to another video, guys. So Jude isn't with me filming today. Today's on Saturday. He films with me on Sundays. I just wanted to make a video talking about the build on my E30 because I've been getting a lot of DMs of people asking me like, hey, what's all done to the E30? Can you give us like a build breakdown? I'm going to use this opportunity to also talk about doing a 24 valve swap in an E30, and I'm going to go through a step-by-step list of everything you guys are going to need to do that swap. When I was 16 years old, or I got this car when I was 14 years old. I always wanted an E30. I thought they were the sickest things in the world. Like, who doesn't? They're so cool. I'd go to the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix, and that's what got me into racing. That's why I have this 2002, and that's why I'm going to be racing it there this year. First time I saw an E30, I'm like, oh my God, I need one.
I need it!
So I saved up every single penny I touched, and I bought one on my 14th birthday, or around there. And then I had the car for 2 years, worked on it. My dad drove it every now and then, like he'd ride me around in the car. And then I was 16, drove the car around for a little bit, and I always wanted 24 valve in my car. I wanted an S52. And being that I was 16 years old and a broke kid, I couldn't afford an S52 at the time. So I got a M52 and a ZF 5-speed, and I put it in the car. All right, so starting it off, why would you want to do a 24 valve swap? Simple reason is more power. Who doesn't want more power?
More power, baby!
I just wanted more power, and I wanted more reliability out of it. And literally doing these swaps, if you do it right, it makes your car way more reliable. You have newer technology in the car. I think it makes it easier to work on. I think it's just an all-around better car at that point. I think this is the engine the E30 should have came in. That leads me into my next point. What engines are out there? There's a lot of different engines you can choose from. In your family of like M50s, you have the M50 and the S50, which the M50 is the non-M 325 engine, and the S50 is the M engine, M3 engine. The M50 is a 2.5 liter OBD1, S50 is a 3 liter, a little bit higher compression, a little bit bigger cams, still OBD1. However, my point of view, I wouldn't really waste your time doing an M50 swap unless your M20 blew up, or you know, you have an M50 laying around and it's something you just want to throw in, make the car drive a little bit better. But in terms of overall performance, like if you're going from an M20 B25 to an M50, it's not that big of a difference, not big enough to do a whole engine swap. But I think the engine that you get your best bang for the buck is, of course, the S52. You can find an S52 for $2,500 to $3,000. It's a 3.2 liter. There's bigger cams than the M52, higher compression. They make a lot of torque. It's like you do an M50 intake manifold, a tune, and some headers. You're at like 220 wheel and like 220 foot-pounds of torque around the wheel. And it's a fun car, especially in this. And you know, the thing that people don't understand, the BMW power band, you have power everywhere. You have power from 3,000 RPMs to 7,000 RPMs, and it's just flat torque curve. It's so linear. I know that term gets overused so much. Everyone's like, oh, this is linear power band that. Everything's a linear power band. But these engines are, and they're super smooth. They're super nice engines to drive. Going for all of those engines, the biggest thing you're gonna have to modify is your oil pan. The E30 oil pan is in the front, or the oil pan of the E30 is in the front of the car, and the subframe sits behind the oil pan. The E36 and E46, the oil pan sits in the rear, and the subframe is more towards the front. So you put an E36 or an E46 engine in an E30, the oil pan hits the subframe. One way to fix that is, and so if you can find an E34 with an M50 or find one of those oil pans, it's actually a front sump oil pan. And that's one of the oil pans you're going to need for the engine swap. When you're mounting this engine into the car, You will need aftermarket engine mounts. You use the E36 engine arms. I went with Condor Motorsports or Condor Speed Shop's UHMW mounts. I love them. They're just that step below aluminum, so it's not like, it doesn't like make the car feel tinny or like real vibraty, but it definitely, you can feel the motor. That's one of the things you're going to need to modify across the board. That's the one thing that doesn't fit of the engines being a direct bolt-in. Pretty much after that, it's a direct bolt-in. While we're talking about engines, I want to talk about OBD1 versus OBD2. So in my opinion, I wouldn't go OBD1. Like, if you're going S50 and you have the money to buy an S50, buy an S52. Way better. I'd actually rather have an M52 with OBD2 than an S50 with OBD1, just because it's, or if you're going standalone, that's a little bit different, but if you're sticking with the stock setup, I recommend OBD2. There's a little bit more wiring to do, we'll get into that later, but it's really not hard. It's just better. It's newer, you can read codes, it's like a new car, essentially. You can plug an OBD2 scanner into this car and it'll read codes like any new car does. If you go OBD2, you're gonna need your DME to be tuned in the way of taking what's called the EWS out. EWS communicates with all of the modules in the car to make sure the car isn't being stolen. Like, if you hotwire an E36 or like an OBD2 car, it's not gonna start because you don't have the key. So you have to get that tuned out. You can send your DME off to Kessel Performance, or you can find somebody online that can tune it out. It'll probably cost you maybe $300. If you have a different engine in your car, you're probably gonna need a different transmission, or you can stick to your stock transmission. I recommend, if you're going with an S52 or an S54, I recommend getting a ZF5 speed, because the stock E30 transmissions are a little bit weak. You can use the stock E30 transmission, the Getrag 260. The only thing different is, because the M20 sits on a 20-degree angle and the M52 or 24 valve sits on a 30-degree angle, the transmission is going to be a little bit offset to what it's normally, so you'll have to modify your cross member. The cross member will have to be welded up to match another 10 degrees. Or if you do like I did, you can get a ZF5 speed, which is the transmission that comes on these engines. And then you literally just bolt it in with an E36 cross member and call it a day. I think the ZF transmissions are way better. I recommend a ZF5 speed just because they're stronger. I could turbo this car right now and make 600 wheel and the transmission would be completely fine. If you do go with that route, you're gonna need a different drive shaft because the transmission's a little bit bigger. Any E36 manual drive shaft will work that has a 4-bolt diff flange at the back. While we're on transmissions, clutch and flywheel. If you're gonna stick with the stock Getrag 260 that comes in these cars, you can use your stock flywheel and everything. It'll bolt up to these engines normally, or you can get an aftermarket setup. If you use an E36, you're gonna need an E36 flywheel and clutch and pressure plate and all that. So if you do go with the ZF 5-speed, you're gonna need all E36 parts, flywheel, clutch, pressure plate. I recommend upgrading everything while you're in there and have everything apart. I just have an eBay flywheel, and then I have a Sachs pressure plate and a 6-puck sprung clutch. Great setup, makes the car super lively, you know, it revs really fast, you can heel toe downshift amazingly, and it was like, it cost me like $400 for the clutch and flywheel setup, and it's great. The next big thing we're gonna get to is wiring. There's some from Condor Speed Shop, Garagistic, Kessel Performance. There's so many out there, which is a plug and play. You plug it into your E30 body harness, and then it adapts your E36 harness to your E30 body harness. For myself, I wanted a bit cleaner of a look. I wanted the wiring harness to be nice and tucked up in the car. I didn't want any extra wires, so I actually cut and trimmed the wiring harness myself. It's actually super easy to do. I'll link a couple wiring diagrams down below. I think it took me like an hour and I had the harness wired up for this car. And I even did that when I was like 16 years old. So a dummy can do that. That's what I did just because it literally cost me maybe $20 with just solder, stuff like that, anything I needed for wiring. Or you'll probably spend around $300 to $400 for an adapter. Now we're gonna get on to brakes because as many of you know, E30's brakes suck. I still have the stock brakes. I know they're horrible. They aren't that bad when you upgrade the lines, pads, rotors, but when you're pushing more power in the car, brakes become a problem in these cars. There's a known thing you can do out there. You can get a Mazda RX-7 Turbo 2 front caliper, which Garagistic and other companies makes an adapter bracket for the spindles on E30s. And then after you get the adapter for your rotors, you can use Volkswagen Corrado VR6 or no, the 4-cylinder, the Volkswagen Corrado 4-cylinder front rotors because they're 4x100, and then you have the inner hub machined out. And then that's really good brake setup. I drove one of my friend's cars and he has those brakes. They work fantastically. Staying on the subject of brakes, we're gonna talk about the brake booster and master cylinder. There's so many different routes you can go with this. I got a E34 brake booster. It's a dual diaphragm brake booster. And I got a E32 7 Series master cylinder. So the E34 brake booster is spaced out and it's smaller, so it'll fit with your M50 intake manifold. And then you can't use an E34 master cylinder because they don't have the right line size. But an E32 master cylinder will bolt onto an E34 brake booster, and they have the correct 11 millimeter. I guess we can get into cooling now. If you have an early model car, I don't think you can use your radiator, but a late model car, you can use your stock radiator. I don't recommend that. I recommend upgrading to a aluminum rad for better cooling, obviously. I just got all new hoses, a new reservoir. This thing cools great. And I literally can sit in traffic. I have my fan on a switch in the car. I can sit in traffic in the car and it won't even overheat even when I don't have the fan on. I have the stock E30 coolant reservoir. I just got a new one, and I bought a stock E30 coolant reservoir hose and I cut it and modified it so it could work on the coolant pipe on the M52. Next biggest bolt-on thing is power steering. A lot of people might not want power steering, but for me, in my case, I actually have a Z3 steering rack in this car. I have all E36 lines. A Z3 steering rack is the same as an E36 steering rack, which this engine came out of. So you use the power steering pump that came off of this engine. You use E36 power steering lines. You might have to cut and bend them a little bit, but that's what I did and it works perfectly. All right, so that's pretty much like all the basics you're gonna need to know to do one of these engines. Like any parts I talked about, I'll listen down below. Oh, one thing I didn't go over, the exhaust on these cars for a 24 valve. You can go multiple ways on it. You can use your stock manifolds, you can buy eBay manifolds. For me, I'm gonna tell you what I did. I have Euro S50 headers. I cut and I modified them to fit in this car. I made a custom exhaust, which I'll link that video right here. I did a custom exhaust for this car. Vibrant Performance 2.5-inch muffler and a little like bottleneck resonator in the inside. It sounds insane. Yeah, so that's pretty much all of it. Thank you guys for watching. Comment down below if you guys have any questions or DM me on Instagram. My Instagram is right here. In the future, it's definitely gonna be a shit ton of videos on this car. I'm just super excited for videos to come in the future, you know, doing daily vlogs. I'm gonna be getting another E92 M3 here soon. Doing driving videos on the track in the 2002 and in this car and in the M3. So much more content to come to this channel, guys. I am super excited for what's to come. Just stick around and watch. Peace out, guys. See you in the next one.